Hi, it's the return of the simple geometric demos, in case the previous videos were too long. Today we'll be coding something inspired by this animation, where we have these colorful chords made out of dots oscillating up and down in an interesting manner. We'll be using CSS grid, which means that each of the dots on a chord is going to be on a different column, and we're going to kind of consider the different chords, different rows, but we're actually going to put everything on a single row. You'll see. One thing I want you to notice before I move on to coding is that we have a middle dot right there, and having a middle dot means that the number of dots on each chord is an odd number. So let's put that into code. We're going to have a number of rows, which is the number of chords. So let's say that's going to be 6 initially. We're going to bump it up later, but for now we don't want any performance issues, so we're going to have a half number, and this is basically going to be the number of dots on a chord starting from one end up to and including the middle dot. So let's say it's going to be something like 13. We're going to get the number of columns, which is going to be twice that half number minus 1, and this gives us always an odd number. Then we're going to get the total number of dots in our demo, which is going to be the number of rows times the number of columns. Everything is going to be within the body. We're going to have a loop, so while n gets decremented and is still positive, we create our dot elements. Now, having done this, let's move on to the CSS and put something on the screen, but of course that needs to be a class. We're going to set the padding, I don't know, 5 pixels should do it. Now, if I could use a keyboard, that would be ideal, but I'm not ideal. Border radius 50%, that looks horrible. Now let's set on the body display grid, place content center. Okay, now we're going to need to set the columns. We're going to need to set a grid area. Basically, they're all going to be on the same first row, but they're going to be on different columns. So grid area, all on first row, and then we're going to need to set the column. So here in a style element, we're going to have a loop. So for let I going from 0 all the way up to the number of columns, increment I at every step, and we are going to set dot nth of type, and we're using nth of type because the style is a sibling of the dots and is before them, so that messes up the nth child index of the dots. So here we're going to have every n columns and I plus 1, and it's plus 1 because the nth of type index is 1 based as opposed to the loop index, which is 0 based. By the way, the grid column index is also 1 based, so we're going to need to add 1 here as well. So let's set the column index as a custom property. So that's going to be the loop index. Now here we're going to have calc I plus 1. Let's see it. Okay, you can see right there, and it only looks in the middle horizontally, and that's because at this point the body takes the height of its content. So let's explicitly set a height to the full viewport height, which gives us an ugly scroll bar because we have a margin. So let's 0 that margin to get rid of the scroll bar. We can of course just go full nuclear with overflow hidden. For now, let's set here a background that's a bit more colorful, so that we can set a dark background here. Not quite black, but still pretty dark. And let's collapse the body. Right, and the next step is going to be positioning these such that they form that V, that down arrow, or however you want to call it. But for that, we're going to need the number of columns. So we're going to set that as a custom property right here in a style attribute. So the number of columns and knowing that, we're going to compute a middle index, right? So this is going to be the average between the first index, which is 0, and the last one, which is the number of columns minus 1. So that's going to be 0.5 times the number of columns minus 1. And of course, like that. Then we're going to get the absolute value between this middle index and the index of the dot. So that's going to be the maximum between, and by the way, I explained the absolute value, how to compute it today in detail in an article which is going to be linked in the description for both the video and the CodePen demo, you know, the poetry. Okay, so this is going to be the middle index minus I and the additive inverse, which is basically reversing their order right here. So I minus the middle index. Now this is going to give us the maximum Y translation value, which is going to be the middle index minus that absolute value times 100%. So basically the absolute value of this difference is going to be 0 in the middle and that middle index on the ends, because this end has index 0, so the middle index minus 0 gives us the middle index, right? And we don't want a small value in the middle and a big one on the edges. We want the opposite, which is why we subtract this absolute value from the middle index before multiplying. So now you're going to see that if we set transform translate Y, if I could type, okay, and you can see we got that V shape. Okay, that's good. Now the next step is going to be set some things differently based on the row as well. So based on the chord, whatever. Technically they're all on the same row, but we're going to have different chords which are also kind of like rows. Yeah, so this is going to go up to the number of rows, and also we're going to pass the number of rows to the CSS. So this is going to be not rows, rows. Okay, and we're not going to go every n columns. We're going to go after all the dots on the previous rows, and the row index is going to be j, and now we can just maximize the CSS. We are going to get like a row progress, which is going to be k, and it's going to be the ratio between the row index j and the number of rows. So like that. Okay, and here actually we're going to set an HSL value, and this is going to be for the hue, saturation, something like that. Okay, so for the hue we're going to use that row progress k times 360, and here we're going to use HSL like that. Okay, now we are going to have an animation, so going to have, come on, I cannot use a laptop. Keyframes, Y, and here it's going to go from minus Y, so minus 1 times Y. And now we're going to have animation Y. Let's set an animation duration here. So let's say 4 seconds. Let's use ease and out, infinite, alternate, something like that. And we should now see it moving. Okay, now we're going to want a delay that depends on the row. So that is calc. We're going to have that row progress times, and let's have -1. so that the animation is already started on load. And one thing I don't like, you can see how here the purple is the first one and then the blues trail and so on, right? So we are going to use something like this, because here we're going both in the opposite direction, and now you can see how the purple is the first one and then the blues trail. So yeah, that was pretty rough, because 270 is basically 3/4 of 360, so 3/4 of a full hue wheel. I will be linking to that in the description as well. Okay, so having done this, let's also add a second component there, which is going to depend on the column. So we are going to add I, the column, over the number of columns, and we're going to need to subtract 2 in this case. So something like that. You can see how it's starting to look like something. We want that blurriness, and we don't want to use a shadow or a filter because that may impact performance. So let's say that we are going to use a radial gradient and up to transparent. Let's see it. You can see how that looks pretty good. We're also going to want to have mix blend mode screen. Okay, now this is getting more interesting, and let's say that we're going to want them to add up a bit more at the end. So we can do that in 2 ways. We can tweak this function, this timing function, and here we have, you can see the timing function right here, the coordinate of the first point, right, 0.420, the coordinate of the second point. You see that the y values are 0 and 1 for the first and second point respectively, and the x coordinates, the first one is 1 minus the second one, or the other way around, right? So we can get a first x coordinate, let's say 0.57, and let's actually copy paste this, copy, and we are going to use that right here. This one is going to be the first x value, and here we're going to have 1 minus x, that first x, something like that. And we can also tweak the keyframes as well. So we can set a percentage, I don't know, 5%, or we may increase it more, and we're going to have something like that. And then we can take this, and we're going to have 100% minus that percentage p, or 100%. So like that. You can see how those add up nicely. And we can of course tweak this as well. So let's say it can be 0.5 or 0.75, and this influences just how much we have of a bend right there, how much it gets curved on moving from one side to the other, because you can have something like 0.75, right? Now I'm not going to tweak it anymore. Let's just increase those numbers and see how it looks with more items. Yeah, it got out of sync. So let's refresh, because it's out of sync now. But I'm not going to play with it anymore. I'm going to leave it like this. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you like the work that I've been putting out since early 2012 and you want me to be able to do more in the future, please consider supporting it. You can do so by being a cool cat and becoming a patron on Patreon. Or if monthly support is not your style, there's the option of one-time donation. Or you can make me happy with a gift of my wish list. Or you could at least share this to show the role I can done in CSS these days. Because honestly, I think it's pretty damn cool. In any event, thanks for watching, and until next time, bye!